Hello and welcome to Ephemera. I am fantasy author Katie Brisky.
And I am editor Jen R. Albert. We're hoping that you're enjoying our theme music courtesy of Alex White. Welcome to anyone joining us for the first time, and welcome back to those of you who have visited our virtual home before. For those of you who are new, Ephemera is an award-nominated reading series chaired by Katie and myself.
Pre-COVID, we held events in the Glad Day bookshop, and while we await our triumphant return, we are so incredibly glad to meet with this found family of fiction lovers right here on YouTube. And we would like to begin tonight by acknowledging that the land on which I live and work is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. This land is covered under Treaty 13 and is part of the Dish with One Spoon.
And the land on which I live and work is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas, and is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. Additionally, this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
And we're going to be talking about residential schools tonight. So if you're a survivor or the friend, family, or loved one of a survivor and you need support, you can call the Indian Residential Schools Crisis Line 24 hours a day at 1-866-925-4419. And if you need to tap out at any point, please take care and just watch for Jen to come back on screen. Our theme tonight is family, and I need to talk about the thousands of Indigenous kids who did not go home, the family still dealing with trauma throughout generations, and the communities that are forever altered. As we know, the bodies of 215 Indigenous children were recently uncovered at the site of a formal residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia. Another 104 were recently uncovered in Brandon, Manitoba. The true number of children who died in the residential schools may never be known. Estimates range from 4,000 to the tens of thousands due to an incomplete historical record. The last residential school closed in 1996, when I was 5 years old. They took children as young as 3 or 4. This is very much present, not past. This is not an incomplete record, this is violence. Part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's definition of reconciliation is awareness of the past and an acknowledgement of the harm that has been inflicted. So please let me say the residential schools were not designed to educate. Erin O'Toole, they were not designed to help Indigenous peoples. They were designed for genocide. Reconciliation also involves atonement for the causes of that harm and action to change behavior. There have been 94 calls to action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, with only a handful acted upon. The federal government must implement the calls to action specific to them. They must ensure that Indigenous peoples can bring their children home, that funding is provided to support communities in further site searches, and that these sites are protected while Indigenous nations determine how they wish to proceed. There must be resources made available to assist survivors, families, and communities, and the government must stop fighting survivors in court. And I would apologize for my own part in continuing the harm of residential schools. For every historic tour I gave, in which I talked about Egerton Ryerson and either omitted mention of his designing the residential school system or skated over it, I am truly, deeply sorry. I have demanded action from my MP, and I am making my own donation to the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. We acknowledge the past, we acknowledge the harm, and we commit to ensuring that this history never repeats. Thank you.
A reminder to everyone as well, our code of conduct is posted online. If this is your first event, please do check it out on Twitter or on Facebook. If you're so inclined, you can still feed Fred the physically distanced donation dragon. You can find a link to our Ko-fi at the top of our channel, near our banner, or on Twitter or Facebook for tonight's event. It is ko-fi.com/ephemera reading series.
Jen, Prancy is sad.
Oh no, what's wrong with our favorite skeleton deer?
Well, he's looking for his family. I suggested it might be a periton.
But that wasn't it?
No.
Well, it sounds like we should ask somebody very wise for some help. I might have an idea, but for now, it is my very great pleasure to introduce tonight's first reader. Brent Lambert is a Black queer man who heavily believes in the transformative power of speculative fiction across media formats. He resides in San Diego, but spent a lot of time moving around as a military brat. His family roots are in the Cajun country of Louisiana. Currently, he manages the social media for Faya Literary Magazine and just had an anthology produced with Tor.com titled Breathe Faya. He can be found on Twitter at Brent C. Lambert, talking about the weird and the fantastic. Ask him his favorite members of the X-Men and you'll find different answers. You'll get different answers every time. Brent?
Yes, that is very true. I was cycling through my favorites today.
Yeah, I want to. So first up, who is it today?
Okay, so far, Magic has been like one of my consistent favorites for a long time. Like Ileana Rasputin is just such a cool character, and she's really, her profile is like really blown up in the past few years. So like she just kind of remains a favorite lately. Yeah. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here. This is cool. Thank you for having me out. So I guess should I just jump into it or? Yep. Okay. Cool. So I'm reading a piece from a novel in progress. 2020. I don't know why 2020 gave me the idea to write something that had vampires in it. Probably not the best selling point, but I did it anyway. So that's where this is coming from. And in terms of like content warnings, just whatnot to kind of prepare the audience. Obviously blood. There's some mentions of violence. There's death of family members mentioned. Alcohol and pregnancy also mentioned as well in this selection. So just kind of preparing you for that content warning here. So it's starting just to kind of set the scene a little bit. I have two of my main characters. One's like an assassin and an assassin's apprentice, and they're in this vampire city, and they're trying to meet with like a contact. So I'll start off there. They stopped at a bar with scrawled purple paint lettering. The words "Kiss Mama" was written along a badly nailed piece of wood. Several raucous conversations and insults could be heard from the outside. Asudai folded her arms across her chest and turned up her nose. "Your contact's in here?" "It's her favorite spot," the white blade said, thinking back to when he first met the woman here almost 50 years prior. She had been a young contraband runner then, hoping to smuggle people out who were due to be eaten and turned over to the government as food. It was risky work, and the white blade helped with it as best as he could. The Apokium only sanctioned it because they wanted to begin building a better network of information within Hema. But it had felt right, and it was a feeling he had continued seeking until he found it again in guarding the War King. The bar had earned its name because the countess ruling Hema at the time of its opening always referred to her bites as kisses. The owners had taken the risk so blatant, jabbing a thumb at their country's ruler, but the bar took off, and for whatever reason, the vampires saw well enough to leave it alone. "Does this place at least have good drinks?" "Best dragon beer I've ever had outside of an actual dragon lord serving it to me." Asudai, still frowning, walked up to Kiss Mama's door and pushed it open. You owe me the full story behind that after dragging me to a place like this. If we stop this war from happening, I'll tell you all about it. The white blade walked past her and gave her a pat on the shoulder. The bar was absolute chaos, but somehow everyone inside knew exactly how to navigate it. And unlike the general gloom in the rest of the capital, this place seemed free. People were laughing. Old men were hopelessly flirting with people they had no chance of succeeding with. A few of them thought they actually had succeeded and didn't yet catch the hint. They were dealing with someone who would want payment at the end of the night. And they'd pay because people mired in bleak misery were desperate to feel wanted. Darts, a dangerous game for a bar, were sloppily being thrown against inaccurately divided dartboards. The live band tonight consisted of 3 women playing guitars. They were stringing together a song about a warlock foolish enough to love a god of nightmares. It was his enemy's heritage, and he felt a shiver at it being played so openly. But the white blade took it all in because his training demanded it. Let no detail escape your eye. See everything, even the filth. Follow the heretic and the saint. Watch their steps, hear their breath. One observation is all you need to achieve victory. Those had been the words of his mentor and one of the few times he'd been allowed to witness his glory. The white blade never forgot them, and they had never failed him. He spotted his contact at a tucked-away corner in the back of the bar. The first thing he noticed was her eyes. They used to be wells of idealism, but now it seemed the decades had worn them down. He had loosely kept in touch with her and knew her smuggling efforts had evolved to trying to effect change from inside the government. Politics had a way of shattering worldviews because success so often hinged on compromises a younger you would never have made. He could see the consequences of those personal bargains in her eyes. She got up on the cane when she saw him and went to hug him. Such open affection was strange for him, but he appreciated it. She laughed as she took in his face. You haven't aged a damn day since I last saw you. You should have visited before I became an old withered lady. Becoming old is a sign of a survivor. Wear that with pride, the white blade said, and squeezed her hand before taking his seat. He motioned towards Asudai. This is my apprentice. She reminds me a bit of you in the fiery department. Hi. Lovely to meet you. Anyone the white blade trusts is forever a friend of mine. I'm Alyssa. The white blade knew better than to jump right to business. He hadn't seen Alyssa in a long time, and rushing this might not give him the information he needed. Kindness was often the best tool in gathering intelligence. A friendly conversation always said so much more than intended. Urgency sometimes required a slower pace. I can't believe this bar is still open. I didn't think anything in this capital lasted besides for the vampires. Alyssa scoffed and looked down into her half-empty jug of beer. It would have closed, but then they started serving blood on the menu too. Got enough vampire business to keep it from shutting down. But it's daytime, so we get it to ourselves for now. She still didn't care a great deal for the vampires, and given the circumstances, he found no fault in the stance. He wondered how long working in the hypocrisy had taken its toll on her. Her hair had gone completely gray, and those bags under her eyes weren't just from old age. She had climbed her way up the ranks high enough to have some proximity to the Countess, but attaining that couldn't have come without compromises. Power asked good people to give up so much of themselves. A waiter walked by, and Alyssa flagged him down with 2 held-up fingers. 2 dragon beers for my friends, please. The waiter nodded and walked off. Asudai watched him. He's pretty sickly looking. Vampires been taking the bite out of him? It's how the poor and pretty ones like him survive, Alyssa said with a shiver. They offer themselves up to the vampires who want more blood than their quota allows, and when they want other pleasures. I swear, I'll bore this place more and more with every passing day. Hema is rotting from the inside out. Why stay? Asudai asked, sympathy instead of judgment in her tone. The white blade felt a bit of pride. His apprentice, despite her usual demeanor, was learning, and being friendly was more natural to her than she was willing to admit. Asudai made it so far because of her circumstances, but it wasn't in her nature. She'd come to the art of killing because there wasn't any other way for her. Family. I may have found myself a degree of influence, but not enough to escape this place with all of them. I've only been able to protect them from being chosen as the next year's slaughter. Do you know they started paying women to have babies to keep up the population? You get a higher payout with each subsequent child. Alyssa shook her head and took a swig of her beer. We're treated like farm animals. It's repulsive. The waiter returned with their drinks, and the white blade downed a big gulp of the dragon beer. The concoction perfected the balance of searing heat and sweetness. He watched a smile bloom across Asudai's face as she tried them for the first time. Angels above, that's damn good. Alyssa laughed. One of the few things left in this country. I would hope you count yourself amongst those things as well, the white blade said, pausing for a moment. Were you able to get it done? Alyssa looked over their shoulders and then around her before nodding. Yes, I've arranged for you to have an audience with the Countess. I wasn't sure I'd be able to pull it off given what happened in Abacus Valley. But your name carries weight with those who have enough sense to know who you are. Recognition was the one tragedy of him being too good at his job. People started to spread his name like legend, and when an assassin loses anonymity, they lose their best edge. But he stirred the pot of those legends, obscuring what he looked like at least. Some people thought he was an incredibly scrawny minotaur, and others believed he had only one eye because he was the child of an angel. He told whatever stories he needed to at least save his face, if not his name. All it took was a few lies here and there, and braggers would spin it as truth to claim some sort of proximity to him. People loved being able to attach themselves to great stories. What can you tell me about Abacus Valley? There's not enough details yet. We know for sure it's all gone, complete destruction. Alyssa looked down at her drink again. I had 2 nephews and their families there. One brought a new baby boy into the world. The white blade reached into one of his pockets, grabbing a trinket and placing it by Alyssa. Then let's make sure no more death befalls those you love. Take this. What is it? Alyssa asked, grabbing the green square piece of metal and eyeing it with scrutiny. It's a coin I collected from the Manus Kingdoms around 4 centuries ago. It's worth enough now to get you and your whole family out of here. And there'll be more than enough to spare if you make sure you can establish good lives somewhere far from him. Alyssa's eyes suddenly didn't look so burdened anymore. Oh, I don't know what to say. Promise you'll stop fighting and finally get some rest. You've done what you can to try and change the world, my friend. And believe me, you have whether you think it or not. You deserve a life of your own now. Alyssa gripped the coin and her eyes welled. Thank you. I'll never be able to repay you. And I would never ask. He reached across the table and enveloped her hands in his. But you need to do this fast. Things with the Countess may not go the way I'm hoping, and then she'll be looking for someone to blame. So move fast and get out. Alyssa kissed his fingertips. Thank you. So that's why I had out of that. That was a little scene I took out of this novel in progress thing. So I'm going to keep working on it. But yeah.
I feel like I'm going to want the whole novel on a t-shirt. There are just so many quotable lines. I could hardly keep up.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Brent. That was wonderful. But I do wonder who is going to help Prancy discover who his family is.
Wow.
Jen, not Brent.
I can guess. We have many smart friends, but our friend, the swamp hag, is among the smartest. Gathering up our lantern and a sensible pair of shoes, we plunge into the misty depths of the swamp.
We find the swamp hag in her hut, sitting before a crackling hearth. Ah, yes, the swamp hag says. I can tell you about Prancy's family. Oh, Jen, you're right, she's very wise. But you must pass 3 tests.
Test the first. The flash fiction anthology, Brig Faya, was a collaboration between whom? You are allowed to Google, or you can rewind the little YouTube thingy to the point where I introduced Brent. Please come back.
Yeah, so answer on Twitter or in the chat. And now, let's welcome tonight's performer, Irene Zhong. Irene Zhong explores and mythologizes how we relate to each other and the ever-changing world. The sound world they inhabit is a delicate chamber folk fusion of Hakka Chinese melodies and Western art music. Irene is the resident composer of The Shale Project, an indie multimedia world-building initiative spearheaded by Sienna Tristan and Avi Silver. Right now, Irene is working on a collection of obscure stories and perspectives they have accumulated since their move to Melbourne, Australia in 2016. You can find more info on them at irenemusic.card.co. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Irene. For longtime Ephemera fans, I am also known as the Swamp Hag. So today I have prepared a a cover for all of you, and it's a song that comes to mind when I think of family. So this is Blood by the Middle East, and I'd like to content warn for a cancer mention and familial death. It's in the last verse, and yeah, you can just tune out for about 4 minutes if that's something you need to look out for. Thank you. Older brother, restless soul, lie down. Lie for a while with your ear against the earth, and you'll hear your sister sleep talking, say your hair is long, but not long enough to reach home to me. But your beard someday might be. And she'll wake up on a cold sweat on the floor, next to a family portrait drawn when you were 4, and beside a jar of 2-cent coins that are no good no more. She'll lay it aside, older father, weary soul, you'll drive back to the home you made on the mountainside, with that ugly, terrible thing, those papers for divorce, and a lonely ring, a lonely ring. Sit on your porch and pluck your strings, and you'll find somebody you can blame, and you'll follow the creek that runs out into the sea, and you'll find the peace of the Lord. Grandfather, weary soul, you fly over your life once more before you die. Since our grandma passed away, you've waited for forever and a day just to die. And someday soon you will die. It was the only woman you ever loved that got burned by the sun too often when she was young. And the cancer spread and it ran into her body and her blood. And there's nothing you can do about it now. Thank you. I have another song for you. And this one is an original, and halfway while writing it, I realized that it was actually a song to myself, which was a fun little discovery. I thought I was just writing about a little haunted deer, but I realized that it was a letter to my future self. And it's a kind letter, which is always good. I think it's a hopeful and aspirational letter, and I think, you know, the first member of your family is always yourself and your relationship with yourself. So this is Dear Friend. A hop and a leap and you're gone again. That foggy morning you weren't yet my friend, but I think I knew it even then. In our beginning we drafted our end. I wished for the snow, but you sent for rain. I wanted to grow without feeling the pain. You knew that I couldn't, but even so, through brambles and thorns we set off to go. Fly, 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 my dear friend, please wait for me around the bend. I'm waiting for my spots to fade. Next winter will melt them away. Year after year you break and regrow. Year after year I plant and resow. Weary and winded, but even so, autumn wraps velvet on our hands and our toes. Sigh, 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 my dear friend, please wait for me around the bend. I'm waiting for my spots to fade. Next winter will melt them away. Pray, dear friend, keep chasing that which your heart intends. I'll soon be near you at your side. These long bitter months, I'll take them in stride. When I am wiser and when I am grown, when I am glad to be seen and known, you'll look down the river and see that I'm happy for you and I'm happy for me, my dear friend. Please wait for me around the bend. I'm waiting for my spots to fade. Next winter will Keep chasing that which your heart intends. I'll soon be near you in the light. I'll tell you again that will be all right. Thank you so much.
So beautiful.
Thank you. That was such a lovely letter to your future self.
Thank
It
you.
makes me want a haunted dear friend.
You have one.
I do have one.
have
We
one.
all have
We
one.
all have one.
Speaking of our haunted dear friend, thank you, Irene. Do we have an answer to give to the swamp hag?
Not from the chat.
We do on
Maybe
Twitter.
somebody- Oh, good, good.
We do on Twitter. It's a collaboration between Tor.com and Via Magazine.
Yes,
Correct.
it is correct. And it's available to read for free on Tor.com.
You should all go do that then. Now, test the second. Tonight's musician is the resident composer of which indie multimedia world building initiative? A, The Shale Project. B, The Worlds of Plantington III. Or C, Swamp Tales. Answer on Twitter or the chat.
I feel like if the chat gets this one wrong. Now,
Then I guess
on
Francie
to-
won't find his family, so
Oh, well,
they
then we
should
won't have a lovely.
they should go
invisible
follow
dear
Irene's
friend.
links that we posted.
Another reader?
Yeah, let's do it.
Next
That's probably a good call at this
reader-
point.
Arkady Martine is a speculative fiction writer and, as Dr. Anna Linden Weller, a historian of the Byzantine Empire and a city planner. Under both names, she writes about border politics, narrative and rhetoric, risk communication, and the edges of the world. She is a policy advisor for the New Mexico Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, where she works on climate change mitigation, energy grid modernization, and resiliency planning. Her debut novel, A Memory Called Empire, won the 2020 Hugo Award for Best Novel. Arkady grew up in New York City and after some time in Turkey, Canada, Sweden, and Baltimore, lives in New Mexico with her wife, the author Vivian Shaw. Find Arkady online at www.arkadymartine.net or on Twitter as @ArkadyMartine. Welcome.
Hi, it's lovely to be here. So I thought I'd read something from a new piece that is the opening to a novella that's going to be published next year in 2022 with Subterranean Press. The novella is called Rose House. I don't think you can pre-order it yet, but that should be very soon. And I thought I'd read this because in thinking about family, I realized I didn't write very much about family in the Teixcalan books, but I write a lot about mentors and their students, and that's a kind of familial relationship, and it sometimes can go interestingly wrong. So I thought I'd read the opening of this novella. The content warnings for this are murder and the existence of police. Basit Denia's greatest architectural triumph is the house he died in. Rose House lies in the Mojave Desert near China Lake, curled like the petals of a gypsum crystal in the shadow of a dune, all hardened glass and stucco walls, curving and curving, turning in on themselves, a labyrinthine heart beating an endless electric pulse. Denia was not the first person to die there. Now he is also not the last. Denia's houses were haunted to begin with, all of them, but Rose House was the last and the best. An otherwise place, Denia called it in one of his rare interviews, the one which ran on the cover of Places magazine, distributed electronic, holographic, and in exquisite rare print for customers willing to pay. The accompanying photograph shows him cradled in the house's cast shadow, one hand pressed to the smooth stucco wall. The desert sand creeps over his bare feet in little drifts, touches the hems of his pressed linen trousers. His fingertips are white with pressure, as if he is stroking the wall he had spilt. A house embedded with an artificial intelligence is a common thing. A house that is an artificial intelligence, infused in every load-bearing beam and fine marble tile with a thinking creature that is not human, that is something else altogether. Dr. Céline Gazil, possessor of one of those rare print copies of Deniau's interview for Places, touches the place on the photograph where Deniau touches Rose House, and then draws her fingers back as if burnt. She should know better than to get skin oils on something as fragile as magazine paper. She should. She touches it again, as if she could touch the house through Deniau or Deniau through the house. Bassett has been dead for a year. Rose House has been sealed exactly that long. There is an insurmountable gap. Her phone rings again, pulsing on her wrist, insistent. Rings through to her bone conjunctor adjunct, vibrates in her skull. China Lake Precinct Police, the tiny screen reads. Same as last time. It's 4 a.m. where Céline is, just early enough for the cries of men and birds down at the Trabzon docks to begin. The distant creaking of piers. Salt on the wind. There's salt on the wind near Rose House too, half a world away. Céline doesn't answer. She can only think of one reason the China Lake Police would call her, and it is if Rose House had burned down. It is too early in the morning to allow that to be the case, even in imagination. Since Bassett Deniau died, old age and one of the nastier mesotheliomas got him at last, Céline has been to Rose House one time to visit the old monster and see what's been made of him, what he'd left her. She went alone. She had to. Rose House wouldn't allow anyone else inside. Deniau's will had been very specific, and Rose House was obedient. When it pleased to be, Rose House had always been obedient. Salt on the wind and the smell of dust. All of Deniau's sketches and files and archival material locked up inside that gypsum flower of a building, their only keeper, Rose House itself. Céline, watching the dawn over the Black Sea, watching the dull silver blank screen of her phone, quiescent for now on her wrist, thinks, what better to keep watch over the secrets of a dead magician of buildings than the soul of a building he'd engendered? Thinks as well, recalling the origins of the phrase magician of buildings, how Bassett Deniau had called himself that offhand, self-crowning. Thinks, if I don't pay attention, I'm going to write like Bassett all my life just because he made me his archivist once he was safely dead. Deniau's in Rose House too, what's left of him. Compressed sufficiently, a corpse becomes a diamond that can be displayed on a plinth, an altar that no one will ever see, or almost no one. When Deniau's will had been entered into probate, all the hungry journalists and academics and more junior architects and nationalist politicians from his adopted country and the one that gave him birth both had discovered that the old man had denied them the satisfaction of vulturehood. All of his archives, his sketches, in Rose House. Rose House itself and the mind that was Rose House, or dwelled within it, sealed, save for Céline. That was in the will. Not anyone else but Céline Gazil, even though she denounced Bassett a decade ago, denounced the very idea of architecture as a private place, a secret for the rich or the brilliant to enjoy. Bassett had taught her once. She had, quite probably, loved him once. Almost everyone did. And then they had not spoken since she had made her claim, said her piece, named his otherwise houses poison palaces built for his own glorification and nothing more. And then the old monster died and left Rose House to her. To her, but only as one of the secrets she so publicly despised. She could visit once in a year, said the will. Once in a year for the space of a week. 1 week to open Rosehouse's vault, see Bassett's drawings, his notes, the vast collections of his art. 1 week in which she is permitted to take her own notes and speak to Rosehouse's animating intelligence all she likes. She may not take photographs or make copies. Doing so will cause Rosehouse to cast her out into the desert like any intruder. She'd been. Of course she had. A month ago, she'd gone inside and managed to say only 3 days of her 7. 3 days, and then she'd run away again and dreamed of Bassett diamond cold, watching her from his plinth while the house laughed like a sandstorm. Her phone rings. China Lake Police Precinct. Answer, says Celine. If Rosehouse is burnt, she should figure out how she is going to bear it. Dr. Celine Gazelle, says the voice on her wrist. An American voice, flat with the vowels of the Intermountain West. Yes, she says. What is it? This is the China Lake Precinct, Dr. Gazelle. We'd like to know your physical location. Trabzon. A pause, a longer pause. Where's that? Almost, Celine laughs. Americans. It's in Turkey, northeastern Turkey, on the Black Sea. You woke me. We're sorry about that, ma'am. Trabzon, Turkey. Okay, that's where you have a place of residence? What is this about? Celine asks. She wants the news. She wants to know. She is braced so hard she might shatter. There's been a murder at Rosehouse, Dr. Gazelle, says her wrist. Have you traveled to the States in the past week? The wave of relief that rocks her is inappropriate, she knows. But it is relief nonetheless. Detective Maritza Smith had the ill luck to be on tip-line duty the night Rosehouse called. The China Lake Precinct is chronically understaffed. Where isn't in these latter days of the convulsed and heat-maddened West? And a long time ago, before she made detective, she'd thought it'd spare her long nights listening to nothing, or the wind, or some drunk calling in over the airways, looking for a voice that answered back rather than the voices in their head. Turned out, she was wrong. Maritza's been wrong about a lot of things, most of them to do with how grindingly unchangeable scut work turns out to be. Promotions or no promotions. There's only one other detective at the China Lake Precinct and one deputy, and the deputy's out on maternity. It's Maritza alone in the empty halls, Maritza on the other end of the line, Maritza listening to the wind scream in the desert like a child or a cat or the dead. So she'd caught the call and caught everything that came after, including having to find Celine Gazelle and set about eliminating her as a suspect. There's a dead person in Rosehouse. Okay, there are 2 dead people in Rosehouse. Everybody knows the architect buried himself there. There's an extra dead person, and it's Maritza's problem. Even an animate intelligence than haunts a house, and yeah, Maritza grew up here. She knows like anyone else that Rosehouse is a haunt, and was glad when it was shut up inside with itself for good. Even a haunt has some fail-safes that are built into the groundwork of artificial intelligences. Some fail-safes even Bassett Deniau apparently couldn't get out of his haunt's programming. For instance, all AIs must report the presence of a dead body within their designated sphere of influence to the nearest law enforcement agency. The call came at 2:15 a.m. Maritza wrote it down in her logbook. Please confirm that this is the China Lake Police Precinct. It had started. Neutral feminine voice, accentless and innocuous. Could have been anyone, or anyone's vocal synther app, making them sound utterly unmarked. Maritza has one on her phone for when she has to call customer service lines. She'd said, "This is Detective Smith at the China Lake Precinct. Yes, how can I help you?" She remembers, indelible clear, that she'd been doodling in the margins of the call log, looping lines, one following the other, filling in an abstract shape. "This is Rosehouse," said that unremarkable voice, and Maritza had sat up so straight her spine cracked. She doesn't know what she said next. Probably something like, "What?" Some disbelief noise. Later, she assumed she thought it must have been a prank. Rose House was shut up. Rose House had no one in it. Rose House was an artificial intelligence with no care for any human life, save the architectural, or Rose House was a haunt, or both, and either way, it didn't call a tip line. This is Rose House, that voice repeated. Detective Smith, are you authorized to take duty of care notifications under the auspices of Federal Artificial Intelligence's Surveillance Act, Section 4A? Maritza had taken a duty of care act once before. It had come from the AI in the China Lake Angel's Heart Rehabilitation Home, which had spoken in chained monosyllables like a bad screen reader. Nothing like this bell-clear voice on the other end of the tip line. The Angel's Heart AI had called to report a pattern of unanswered resident distress calls extending for more than 3 months. Maritza had forwarded it to the Department of Health, and she had no idea what had happened next, only that Angel's Heart was still open and operating. Presumably enough had changed that the AI stopped getting its wires tripped. Yes, she'd said. I am authorized. Oh, good, said Rose House. And for the first time, Maritza had heard it in its own voice, or she remembers hearing it even then, at the beginning. The lilt and the rattle, sand sliding down a dune. Desert cold, even through the Synther neutrality. And then it goes on from there, and I'll stop for now.
Wow. Man, what a character already. Yeah, I feel like I'm going to be hearing Salt on the Wind just echoing around my skull for until I can get my hands on my own copy. That was wonderful.
The fun of this one is that I kind of decided to see what would happen if I wrote something long form the way I usually write short fiction. So super lyrical, really weird, everything I'm obsessed with. This one's kind of secretly about Le Corbusier, which
Love it.
we'll find out later.
Love it. My inner historian is just squealing all throughout. Thank you so much. I think we might have some answers for our quest, though.
Yes, the Shale Project in chat has said Swamp Tales.
On Twitter, we've got the Shale Project.
Oh, okay. Okay, that sounds more right.
Let's try that one. And the Swamp Hag applauds. So we're very close to finding Prancy's family.
That's very nice.
Yeah, so test the third, the very last test.
The very last test. Always the third is the last.
Yeah, that's always how it goes. 100%. Yes. So our third and obviously final test is Arkady Martine is the author of the novels A Memory Called Empire and A Desolation Called what? Can answer on Twitter or the chat. And I'm very pleased to introduce our final reader tonight. A.C. Wise's fiction has appeared in publications such as Clarkesworld, Apex, and Uncanny. Her work has won the Sunburst Award for Excellence in Canadian Literature of the Fantastic and has been a finalist for the Sunburst, Nebula, Lambda, and Aurora Awards. And her work as a reviewer and critic has been a finalist for the Ignite Awards. Her debut novel, Wendy Darling, came out earlier this month from Titan Books, and a new short story collection, The Ghost Sequences, is forthcoming from Undertow Books this October. Find her online at www.acwise.net and on Twitter as @AC_wise. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here, and I love listening to everybody else's readings and performance. They're all wonderful. I feel like I now have 3 very hard acts to follow. But that said, I'm going to read a little excerpt, actually 2 little related excerpts from Wendy Darling. This is Wendy's daughter, Jane, one of the lost boys, having a conversation, and Jane sort of figuring out for herself what family means to her. And in terms of content warning, there's reference to children in danger. Are you all right? Timothy's voice comes out of the dark, soft and frightened, and Jane looks up, startled. Tree shadows dapple his skin as he emerges from beneath them. In the moonlight, he looks like a ghost. She shakes her head, then nods, wiping at her tears and smearing them all over her face. She laughs, a huffing, uncontrolled sound that makes her stomach ache all over again, and it's a moment before she can get herself back under control. No, but I will be. She straightens, makes herself smile for Timothy's benefit, and some of the doubt and fear unwinds from his shoulders, relaxing. She looks around, realizing where she is. She'd found a hammock and a pile of salvage from the ship and strung it up outside the camp so she could sleep away from the scatter of boys. She sinks into it now, exhausted, and after a moment, Timothy sits beside her. She's glad he's here and not with the shouting mess of boys. They should return for Rufus, try to help him. But even the thought makes her pulse seize, her eyes burn. What can she and Timothy do against all of Peter's hunters? Better to let them grow bored and forget. They're bound to sooner or later. She has to believe it's true. Timothy's added weight, slight as he is, makes the hammock sway. His feet don't even come close to touching the ground as he dangles them over the side. Tiny lines crease the skin between Timothy's brows. He looks like he's trying hard to remember something as they sit in silence, Jane gathering herself, thinking what to do next. She can't run off and leave him and look for a way home. She has to help him, and Rufus too, and any of the others she can convince of Peter's wicked ways. Why were you running? Timothy asks after a moment, his expression clearing from troubled to wide-eyed curiosity. Is it because you saw a monster? The question catches her off guard and she almost laughs, but Timothy's expression is so serious, she swallows down the sound. No, I wasn't running from a monster. Except, she thinks, she was, just not the kind Timothy means. There are no monsters here. She makes her voice firm as she says it, as if will alone could make her words true. Is that because you're here to be our mother? That's what Peter said. Timothy looks up at her. I'm not. Surprised at his words turns into something else as she sees the hope in Timothy's eyes. Peter says that's what mothers are for, Timothy goes on. He says the word mother like it's a strange creature out of a fairy tale, one he's only heard stories about but doesn't really understand. Mothers cook and tell stories, but the best thing is mothers scare monsters away. Jane hesitates. The way Timothy looks at her makes her think for a moment that it could be true. She could be big and safe enough to protect him. Not a mother, but a big sister. At the same time, she feels terribly small. She misses her own mother, and she only wants to go home. No. She lets out a breath, and it hurts. Maybe she should have lied. I don't think so. I'm sorry. Oh. The disappointment in Timothy's voice is clear. But like before, there's a quick silver mood change, and he looks up again. That's okay. We can still be friends. Skip ahead a little bit. How long have you been here, Timothy? Jane hates to ask it, but she feels like she needs to know. There are all these puzzle pieces in her head, but she can't quite line them up. She can't see the picture they make, just bits of it, all broken and scattered around. Always, I guess. Timothy shrugs, an air of defeat hanging off of him. Jane can understand why Rufus would want to forget, why all the other boys would want to forget too. It's so much easier, so much safer for them to go along with Peter and live in a land of endless games and fun. But she is determined to remember. Peter stole her name. He stole her. He hurt people. She will not let that truth go. Do you remember? Jane hesitates. There's another piece of the puzzle she can almost see, but she's afraid to look at. Peter keeps calling her by her mother's name. Timothy's answer might mean she doesn't know her mother at all. Did Peter ever bring back a mother like he said he would? Oh, yes. Timothy nods, beaming as though he'd forgotten until the moment Jane asked, a happy memory to replace the bad ones. Do you... Her voice breaks and Jane swallows, her throat suddenly thick. What was she like? Timothy screws up his face again, thinking, and then his expression clears, and he looks younger than ever, smiling in a way that breaks Jane's heart. Pretty. She was nice. She told stories like you, but better. Timothy's eyes go wide, as if realizing what he said might hurt her. He opens his mouth, but Jane shakes her head, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand and letting out a breath. It doesn't matter, she says. Listen, if Peter went away and brought a mother back from somewhere else, then there must be somewhere else to go, somewhere off the island. Timothy's face scrunches with incomprehension, like he can't grasp there being more to the world than just Neverland. Jane ignores his confusion, jumping up. She can't sit here a moment longer, thinking of the possibility of her mother and Peter, her mother here and never breathing a word of it to Jane. She can't think about Timothy knowing her mother before she ever did, Timothy being older than her, no matter how young he looks. I'll help you, look. The hammock rocks so violently, Timothy almost falls out, but he scrambles out after her. But even though she already suggested Timothy come home with her, being responsible for herself is one thing. Being responsible for Timothy is something else entirely. I'm not scared. Timothy interrupts her, pushing his chest out and raising his chin. It's so brave and ridiculous and wonderful, Jane can't help but laugh. Maybe a good big sister would insist Timothy stay behind, but would he really be any safer with Peter than with her? Deep down, she's glad to have Timothy with her. She'd rather not do this alone. Well, we best leave now then, before the others find us. Another giddy thrill runs through her, and Jane suppresses a burst of nervous laughter. Is she really doing this? Is she really running away from Peter and taking Timothy with her? How will they get home, and what will she do with Timothy once they're there? She can't think about that now. There'll be time to figure it out later. Right now, they need to escape. She gestures for Timothy to follow her, moving as swiftly as she can without making any noise. At the border of the trees, Timothy pauses. His expression is serious, his eyes wide in the drenching moonlight, and Jane is struck with a sudden fear that he means to turn back. This does mean we're friends, doesn't it? The question catches her off guard. A sound rises in her throat that might be a laugh or a sob, but she turns it into a cough to excuse her watering eyes. If Timothy can be brave and fierce and sweet, then so can she. Whatever they do to leave this place, they'll do it together. Of course we are. Jane thinks for a moment, then draws herself up and extends her hand for a formal and proper shake, which seems to her a very grown-up thing to do. I'm Jane, and it's a very great pleasure to have your friendship. Timothy beams, pumping her hand enthusiastically. Hello, Jane, he says. It's very good to know you and be your friend.
Wow. I would be surprised that you could charm and deeply unsettle me at the same time, but I've read your short fiction, so I'm not surprised. Oh, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. And I think we might have our third and final quest here. I know I have an answer from Twitter. How's the chat doing?
We have some answers.
All right, well, my answer from Twitter was a desolation called Peace.
Aha. Well, did we pass? I think we passed 3. So
Well, then we did. That was the correct answer.
We
So where's
did.
Francie's family?
Reach to your left or your right if you're mirrored.
I don't know if I'm. What? What is this?
Well, there's one more
Doesn't
test.
look like an answer. Oh no, a bonus test. Who
Says-
saw that coming?
The swamp hag. How many people are on the cover of Wendy Darling? Answer in the chat on your screen.
Or yell at your screen.
Our friends here.
And actually, if the author herself wants to hold it up, maybe I can help people out.
Whoa.
I'm definitely hearing a shout from the distance.
Yep.
I'm definitely hearing that it's 1, 2, 3 people.
That's the answer. We passed the bonus test.
All right, I'm gonna remove this fabric and we'll find out that Prancy's family is, hey, it's a mirror. So what does that mean?
Us. We're Prancy's family. What a nice metaphor.
And a nice mirror.
Nice computer screen.
I thank you. It's because it's reflecting all of you. That's why it looks so lovely.
All of us, and all of us in chat. Well, thank you. And until next time, don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Ephemera Series. And please subscribe to this YouTube page. We would like to thank the Toronto Arts Council, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America for their funding.
And as we close out tonight, we'd also like to thank our fabulous readers and musician, composer Alex White, our friends, families, loved ones, and you. Thank you for staying with us, and we will see you next on July 21st, right here on YouTube.
Good night.
Good night.